Good afternoon. Let me welcome you to our November 10th Sunday School lesson. This is the fifth session in a series that's titled Navigating Family Conflict. If you recall, if you've been listening, the first one was involving Cain and Abel. The next one was Abram and Lot, and then the last two involved Isaac and Rebekah, which is actually involving their children, Jacob and Esau. Then we had a second lesson involving Jacob and Esau. Today we go to the next generation, and the last two lessons involving Joseph and his brothers. And all of these, you might notice, are coming from the book of Genesis. And I think it's kind of noteworthy that we have some very good illustrations. God provides us illustrations of family life right in the very start of the Scripture, and that's a family is a very important part of God's plan for how to live together. I particularly like the little picture there on page 98. Shows two young boys wrestling. It reminded me of my wrestling with my next older brother, who was a couple of years older than me. And most of it was very good-natured wrestling. If it got to where it wasn't good-natured, our mom stopped it real quickly. Today's lesson is Joseph and his brother, family jealousy. And the point of the lesson is unchecked animosity can lead to greater harm within the family. Friendly wrestling between two little boys, if it gets out of hand, it can lead to greater harm and can lead to problems. Probably everyone has experienced some type of hurt within a family or within someone close to you. And there's basically three ways that we can handle that type of hurt. One is we hold on to it. If we hold on to it, it builds up to being resentment, bitterness, and if that's not addressed, it can cause great harm within the family or within friendships. A second way is sort of revenge, dishing out pain to the one that caused the pain. So, getting back, and that's very often what will happen. A third is a better approach is dealing with in a manner that would honor God. There's going to be if you have more than two people involved, there will be some type of conflict, and how we resolve that conflict says a lot about our character. Says a lot about how God is working within us. Now, last week we left off with chapter 33 of Genesis, and it's where Jacob and his family had moved back to Canaan. And it's interesting, at the end of it says he arrived safely in Jacob and his family arrived safely in the city of Shechem in Canaan and camped within sight of the city. And then verse 19, for 100 pieces of silver he bought from the sons of Hamor, the father of Shechem, the plot of ground where he pitched his tent, and he built an altar. And that's what we see Jacob doing over and over again, building an altar. He has that connection to God. Chapter 34 covers, if you recall, one of Jacob had 12 sons by Leah and Rachel, plus two handmaidens, one a handmaiden of Rachel and the other a handmaiden of Leah. And then there was a daughter, Dinah, was born to Leah. Chapter 34 indicates how Dinah ended up being raped. And it's curious that in verse 2 of chapter 34 it says, when Shechem, son of Hamor, the Hivite, the ruler of the area, saw her, he took her and violated her. That is, he raped her. It's curious that the son is named Shechem, and also the place where they moved to, the city is named Shechem. And the suggestion, I don't know, but I suspect that Hamor had settled this area. He named the place Shechem and also named one of his sons Shechem, but we don't know for sure. But anyway, as a result of that, he looked at her and ended up wanting her. If you recall the story, Shechem tells his father, he says, get this girl as my wife. And they end up going to Jacob and the brothers, and they end up kind of setting up the brothers ended up setting up a disguise. Says, okay, in order for him to marry our sister, he has to be circumcised. Well, he's circumcised, and as he's having the effects of the circumcision, they end up killing him and all of his clan. Jacob is not happy about that, but verse 31 it says, but they replied, the brothers replied, should we have treated our sister like a prostitute? So could be discussion of exactly what all of that had happened. Chapter 35, Jacob and his family moved back to Bethel, and we see again that they built an altar. Benjamin, the 12th son, I mentioned 11 before, it was actually 10. Benjamin is born, and we see where Rachel dies, and also Isaac, a record of him dying there in chapter 35. Chapter 36 is Esau's descendants, and it's curious that it says, this is the account of Esau, that is Edom. And it goes through, gives the descendants of Esau, and that brings us to chapter 37, where our lesson comes from today. Certainly favoritism had been involved in a great deal of families. It was certainly a part of Jacob. We saw Jacob, his mother favored him, whereas Isaac, his father, had favored Esau. And last 2 weeks we talked about that conflict, the jealousy and rivalry that occurred. Well, history ends up repeating itself. Most of us that have attended childhood Sunday school lessons, we remember Jacob and having the coat of many colors, and we have this narrative of Joseph in chapters 37 through 50 of Genesis. And it's curious, this is the full narrative is the longest in Genesis of any of the other patriarchs. So there's a great deal of space given to the story of Jacob, which makes it kind of interesting that so much, or the story of Joseph, that so much writing is associated with, of the stories associated with Joseph. And the other thing makes it curious about Joseph is that with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, we see men of faith, and sometimes in their life, God spoke directly to each of one of them. But there's no such conversation recorded between God and Joseph. I love the story of Joseph. Even though we have no record of God speaking to him directly, we see God at work in his life. And to me, the story of Joseph is just a premonition or Romans 8:28, that all things work together for them that love the Lord. Terrible things happen to Joseph. We'll see that in today's lessons, but yet at the end, it all works for good, and that's kind of the message there in Genesis chapter 50. So, chapter 37, verses 1 through 4. Verse 1, Jacob lived in land where his father had stayed, the land of Canaan. And this is kind of an interesting verse because it connects Jacob with his father Isaac and his grandfather Jacob. He continued living in this land as a sojourner or a stranger, as the King James Version has, and it has that position because they had not taken full possession of the land. Now, verse 2, it says, this is the account of Jacob, and that's kind of parallel to chapter 36, verse 1. This is the account of Esau. So, verse 37, chapter 37, verse 2. This is the account of Jacob. Joseph, a young man of 17, was tending the flocks with his brothers, the sons of Bilhad, and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives. It's curious that he does not mention the sons of Leah. And there were 6 sons that Leah provided to Jacob, but they don't mention it. as we go further on, it suggests that all the sons were involved. So I'm not sure why the phrase sons of Leah were not included here. So he's tending sheep in the end of verse 2, and he brought his father a bad report about them. Now that's to me, he's 17 years old. He's still a very young man. He brings this bad report about his brothers. And then verse 3, now Israel loved Joseph more than the other brothers because he was born to him in old age, and he made a richly ornamented robe for him. When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him and could not speak a kind word about him. So, favoritism is carried on the next generation. Jacob had experienced favoritism from his mother and kind of a disfavoritism from his father. And instead of learning a lesson of that, of what harm that can occur, it carried on to the next generation because he loved Joseph more than his other sons. Now, why did he love him more? One is because Joseph was born at an older age. There's more of a distance. And I think if we have children, as we get older, children become more of a treasured. But mainly because he was born of Rachel. Rachel was his favorite. You recall when he went to Laman, her father. He worked for Laman for 6-7 years in order to get Rachel, but then Laban tricked him. Tricked him and gave him Leah instead. So this was his first love. So Joseph was a favorite because he was the son of his favorite wife. The second reason is that Joseph kind of adds fuel to the fire by kind of being what we call today as a tattletale. They brought a bad report about his brothers to their father. Now, we are not given the substance of that report, whether it was a grounded report that that the father needed to know. All that we know about Joseph, I suspect that was the case. It was a report that their father needed to know, but him telling their father on them caused resentment. A third reason is that the father made this long-sleeved robe. Generally a long-sleeved robe was ordinarily the garment for daily wear. Did not have sleeves. It had a shorter length in order for freedom to be able to work. But this was almost more of a ceremonial, and it was varied in color. So it was a special robe. And when they saw this, they hated him even more because every time they saw him in that multicolored robe, it reminded them that their father loved him more than them. And that certainly is not a good situation. Another reason, and it's not in our text, but in verses 5 through 11, we see that Joseph ended up having some dreams. The first one, you recall, he had this dream of there was 12 sheaves of grain, and 11 of them bowed down to his sheaf. Each one of those represented one of the 12 brothers, so 11 of them bowed down to him. That certainly didn't make him happy. And then a second dream was that the sun, moon, and 11 stars bowed down to him. And we read verse 10, 11. Sun, moon would have been his father and mother. Then the 11 stars would have been his other brothers. And here's how Jacob responded to that. When Joseph told his father as well and his brothers, his father rebuked him and said, "What is this dream you have? Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow down to the ground before you?" His brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept this in mind. And we know the end of the story, that actually becomes true. Now, the thing that has always kind of bothered me about this is, did Joseph understand those dreams? I think he did. I think he understood that his brothers and even his father and mother would end up bowing down to him. Is he kind of rubbing it, putting salt in the wound? Is he rubbing it in by kind of goading them by telling them these dreams? I've never come to a real resolution to that. I think it might have been more wise for him to just simply kept that to himself, or perhaps told it to his father, shared it with his father privately. But that did not happen. Whatever it was, at the end of verse 4, it says they couldn't make themselves say a kind word about him. This was how this resentment. It didn't matter what he did; they resented it. And it's curious that the word kind word from Hebrew is the word shalom, that we know as peace. They were not able to say a kind word. They were not able to speak peace of him in any way. Now, in verses 12 through 16, get to the right chapter. Now his brothers had gone to graze their father's flocks near Shechem, and Israel said to Israel, which is Jacob, said to Joseph, "As you know, your brothers are grazing flocks near Shechem. Come, and I am going to send them to you." Joseph says, he's happy to do that. He goes and tries to find them, and they've moved. Apparently the grass was not there good, so they moved. In verse 16, it says, they asked someone, he says, he says, "I'm looking for my brothers. Can you tell me where they're grazing?" Verse 17, this man tells them they've moved from here and they've moved over from here. That man answered, "I heard them say, 'Let's go to Dothan.'" So Joseph went after his brothers and found them near Dothan. Now, verse 18, where's verse 18? But his brothers saw him in a distance, and before he reached him, they plotted to kill him. That is just that is really very heartbreaking. That they saw him in distance, and their immediate response is, "Here we've got him out here in nowhere. Our father will never know, so let's kill him. Let's get rid of him." Verse 19, "Here comes that dreamer," they said to each other. "Come now, let's kill him, throw him into one of these cisterns, and say that a ferocious animal devoured him. Then we'll see what comes of his dreams." There was some heavy resentment. There was, I think you would have to put it up in the area of hatred. They hated him to take on this action. They plotted. They saw him coming in this multicolored coat, and they plotted to kill him. They said, and there in verse 19, it says, "Here comes that dreamer," they said to each other. It's sarcasm, jealousy, animosity, hatred, all is kind of into that statement. So they developed this plan, and the plan is we'll kill him, and then we'll throw his body into this cistern or a pit. Some translations call it a pit or a well. And we know that this particular well didn't have any water in it, but they were going to throw his body in there, kill him, throw him in there, then get his coat, cover it with blood, and say that a vicious animal ate him. That's a very very logical story that what might happen to someone out in this wilderness area. Then they says, what will become of his dreams? They're basically saying, we'll never bow down to him. He won't exist anymore. We will kill him and get rid of him. Now, verse 21 it says, when Reuben is the oldest son. He's the firstborn of Jacob. He's the son of Leah. When Reuben heard this, he tried to rescue him from their hands. He says, let's not take his life. He says, don't shed any blood. Throw him in the cistern here in the desert, but don't lay a hand on him. And, Reuben is, to some regard, to some extent, standing up for Joseph, but he says, go and throw, beat him up, whatever, throw him into the cistern. Then it goes on and says, Reuben said this to rescue him from them and take him back from his father. So, verse 23, so when Joseph went to his brothers, they stripped him of his coat, the richly ornamented robe he was wearing, and they took him and threw him into the cistern. Now, the cistern was empty. There was no water in it. So, to some extent, Reuben stood up for him. We have no reason, is given no reason really why he did it. One writer suggested is that, maybe he joined the conversation later. He wasn't in part of the first conversation. That seems to be, and that he didn't agree with what they were planning. Secondly, maybe being the oldest, he assumed some responsibility for his younger brother. And perhaps he was thinking of his father, knowing that Joseph being dead would break his heart. Some writers suggest that he was weak and unstable, and that he, in principle, agreed with his brothers, but lacked the intestinal fortitude to carry out this murderous plan. I don't know. I think Reuben, to some extent, was taking some degree of responsibility. But he didn't. He wanted to still be part of his brother's plan, but not to the extent that they wanted to go. So, what was it? They stripped him of his robe. They next threw him into this pit. It's curious to me that there's no record. Obviously, when they started stripping his garment off them, Joseph would have resisted. Perhaps tried to fight him. Of course, it was 10 or 11 against the 1, so he would have had no chance. But I wonder what he said. What would he have said to his brothers when they were attacking him this way? And we have no record of that. Well, verses 25, I have to read this. And as they had thrown him into the cistern, as they sat down and to eat their meal, they looked up and saw a cavern of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead. Now, it's almost a cavalier attitude. They had attacked their brother, they'd thrown him into this cistern, and they sat down and eat their lunch as if nothing had happened. This caravan, the camels were loaded with spices, balm, and myrrh, and they were on their way to take them down to Egypt. And then verse 26, Judah comes up with a better plan. He says, instead of killing him, let's sell him to these Ishmaelites, and then we'll still, after all, it says, after all, he is our brother, our own flesh and blood. And his brothers agreed. So when the Ishmaelites, when the Midianite merchants came by, his brothers pulled Joseph out of the cistern and sold him for 20 shekels of silver to the Ishmaelites who took him to Egypt. Now, this is, they have this better plan where it says we'll rescue him out and sell him, and they're still, as we'll see, they'll still have the plan is to say that he's dead. Verse 29, when Reuben returned to the cistern and saw that Joseph was not there, he tore his clothes. Obviously, at this point, he didn't know what had happened. He went back to his brother and said, the boy isn't there. Where can I turn? Then verse 31, then they got Joseph's robe, slaughtered a goat, dipped the robe in blood, and they took the ornamented garment robe back to their father and said, we found this. Examine it and see whether it is your son's. So, they on page 104, I think, shows gives a good description of this. The brothers, they probably had a good laugh. They threw him in the pit. Soon after that, they ate lunch, utterly indifferent to the suffering of their younger brother. But seeing Joseph humiliated wasn't enough. There's nothing rewarding about a laughter with a bitter heart. They see this caravan coming by, and they sell him to the Ishmaelites. Now, if you remember, Ishmael was the son of Abraham by Hagar. So it's a very, very distant cousin to these boys. They end up taking this robe, they dip it in blood, they take it to Jacob, and obviously Jacob recognizes it, and he says, "It's my son's robe. Some ferocious animal has devoured it. Joseph has surely been thrown into bits." Then Jacob tore his clothes, put on sackcloth, and mourned for his brothers. All his brothers and daughters came to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. He says, "No," he said, "in mourning will I go down to my grave to my son." So his father wept for him. Meanwhile, the Midianites sold Joseph in Egypt to Potiphar, one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard. So, this mourning in that time could be expressed in different ways. Mourners often would tear their inner or outer garment, and they would put on sackcloth. And I always think of sackcloth kind of like a burlap. It's a very scratchy, uncomfortable type material. Women would wear black or some type of somber-looking clothing. They might refrain from washing or other normal activities. They sometimes would cover their head with ashes or dust, and sometimes would fast, and sometimes they would even hire professional mourners. And this mourning would often go on for 30 days. So Jacob went into a sincere mourning. He had no reason to believe that Joseph was not dead. This coat brought to him was torn up. It was covered with blood. So it certainly is a very sad story of a family dysfunction. We can surmise. We've talked about why the family, why the brothers hated Joseph. Was it all their fault, or was Joseph to blame some? Was Jacob and Rebecca to blame, and Rachel to blame for this? I think it's easy to point blame to individuals. I think in my mind, all of them to some extent were to blame. They should have been able to recognize this dysfunction and to somehow try to address that in a way before it grew to this extent that was very close to murder. Now, on page 104, it says, "These hate-filled brothers immediately set to motion their cover-up. They took the remains of Joseph's torn-up robe, slaughtered a male goat, dipped it in blood of the coat in its blood. Rather than tell their aging father another lie, they presented falsified evidence of Joseph's demise so that Jacob would come to a false conclusion." And so, it's a very sad type of story. Finally, on page 105, it'll live it out. It says, "What action will you take in response to this study? Choose one of the following applications. 1, pray." And I think that's when we start seeing problems within family, among friends, this is the first action to take. Pray for God to keep you from forms of animosity and resentment. We must not tolerate attitudes of unkindness toward others. Secondly is share. Contemplate what you can do to stop these types of issues from taking place in your heart. And that's, I think if we hold it within ourselves, it just grows and it festers and gets worse. And finally, third is forgive. With God's help, begin a process of forgiving someone from a past hurt. Start the process of reconciliation with that individual. And certainly that did not occur in this situation. The brothers at the end of chapter 37 figured they had solved the problem of this brother that they did not like. They had gotten rid of him. They had, in their minds, they would never see him again. And what what a difference that we'll see in the next few chapters. So with that, let me close. I hope that if you're able to join us on Sunday for worship and for Sunday school, if not, I hope that you'll continue to pray with us in many ways. So let me close us in prayer. Our Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day. We thank you for the blessings you've given us. We thank you for just being present in our lives and taking action. Sometimes we don't always understand why things are occurring and why things are occurring in such a way. Certainly, Joseph at this point in the story could not have understood, but we'll see that he displays a tremendous amount of faith. Let us always have that faith that all things will work together for good for ours. Well, we ask you to be with us, be with our services Sunday, and may everything be for your honor and glory. We ask these things in your name. Amen.